Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the live stream. My name is Matt Bailey. I'm the National Ambassador for the Scotch Malt Whisky Society here in Australia. I'm really excited for this live stream. I didn't do a live stream yesterday. It was my birthday. I get a day off at least, I hope, here and there, just to get a live stream in, get a birthday in between live streams. I've been doing live streams long enough now that I know the drill. I know how we're doing this, and I love presenting great content, great learnings, great things that we can all jump on board, learn a few things about whiskey along the way with the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. I say Scotch Malt Whisky Society. I am repping my Archie Rose t-shirt today. Big shout out to the boys over at Archie Rose. Always producing great spirit and well worth visiting the bar. You get a 20% discount if you're a member of the society. Show that green card. Thank you, Alex. It's a very nice comment. Thank you very much. Happy birthday for yesterday, Matt Bailey. It said. I'm just going to introduce our guest for this evening. This evening, my time. This morning, his time. So I want to thank Dr. Andy, of course, for getting up early to talk whiskey. Dr. Andy Forrester, welcome to the stream. Thank you so much for coming in this morning with me.
Hey, good evening, Matt, or, well, my good morning. Nice to see you. How are you?
Yeah, good. And thank you so much for, you know what, if someone messaged me and said, hey, do you want to get up at 8 a.m. and talk about whiskey? I'd be like, not really. It's like...
Well, Matt, I didn't know there was two 8 a.m.s in the two 8 o'clocks in the day. So, and can I actually, before I forget, can I wish you a happy birthday? Because I didn't know yesterday when we were chatting, and I didn't even wish you a happy birthday. So
that's all good. It's all good. Thank you so much. And big shout out to Mark, Rowan, James, Alex, everyone who's tuning in and watching tonight. Thank you so much. We're talking tonight with Dr. Andy. Dr. Andy works for the Scotch Malt Whisky Society in our team in the UK. But is a whiskey scientist, I like to say, spirits educator, someone who has been involved in the, I guess the best way to describe it is the proliferation of information for whiskey and understanding how to educate people better on what Scotch whiskey is and what it isn't and the flavors and all those kind of things like that. So I want to delve in a bit and start a little bit with how this came about, what your background entails. Now, you've got a bit of a history with Wyndham Grant & Sons and the Scotch Whisky Research Institute. Can you touch on both of those a little bit?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I'll do that. Firstly, hello to everyone. Thanks for joining, and hopefully I can enlighten you a little bit this evening. So I hope you're all in good spirit, and I hope you've all got a decent dram, unlike me, who's got a cup of coffee for my morning start. So yeah, okay. I guess an interesting journey, like many of us who've ended up in the Scotch whisky industry. I was hell bent on pursuing a career in academic science, Matt. I was doing a PhD at the University of York here in the UK, and I kind of discovered Scotch whisky as you do through a friend, good mate of mine, Eddie Ludlow, who's well known here in the whisky community, and I was absolutely inspired by what I discovered when I first really appreciated Scotch whisky. And from there, I lost interest in plant molecular genetics and became far more interested in Scotch whisky and stumbled almost literally into the industry. I mean, I kind of make light of it, but I kind of made it my business to get out there, start doing tastings and make friends with the people in this wonderful industry that we work in. Anybody who's touched the Scotch whisky industry, wonderfully friendly place with great camaraderie, and a few good people like Colin Dunn of Diageo and a few others, Jim McCune of Brookladdy, helped me on my first step into the industry, which was working with Edrington, who most people will know for being behind Macallan and Highland Park. And I was a brand ambassador for a brand called John Mark and Robbo's Easy Drinking Whiskey Company. And I don't know if many people remember that, but it's probably the most Aussie Scotch whisky brand you could ever possibly imagine. Very much focused on fun, flavour and friendship.
Yep.
From there, Matt, I went on and, like you say, I worked for Willie Grant's for 6 years, where I was UK ambassador for Balvenie, the Balvenie Distillery, which was good times, learned a lot, spent a lot of time with people like David Stewart and Brian, understanding more about the whisky production process. Spent time in the distillery. That led me to the Scotch Whisky Research Institute and kind of back to science. I'd always harboured an interest in doing that, and I for those that don't know, and I guess that's many of you, the Scotch Whisky Research Institute is the industry's research and technology organisation. It keeps a very low public profile, very much below the parapet, so very few people have heard of it. But it does really, really important work on behalf of the industry as a whole. It's a member organisation, a bit like the society, and the majority of the distillers in the Scotch whisky industry and beyond are members. And the institute is there to carry out fundamental research on behalf of the industry, right through from serial improvement for distilling, working with plant breeders, through process control, so what happens in the distillery, understanding the casks, wood, maturation, to get better results there, and even elements around what we call product protection, which is anti-counterfeiting, ensuring that Scotch whisky make sense?
Makes sense. Your audio is just bouncing a little bit on us here, but just on that point of so the SWRI, the Scotch Whisky Research Institute, of which we talked a bit about on the stream a few weeks back, and we even shared the flavor wheel that was developed by them. And that was, is that something that it sounds like it's almost like a catch-all organization in many ways for lots of different research that happens within the industry?
Yeah, it is, Matt. It kind of started life way back in 1974, which the year I was born. And really the role then was much more of a kind of a tactical, going out to distilleries and helping them solving their problems before companies like Diageo and Chivas had their technical departments, and supporting smaller distillers, which they still do to this day. But it's very much a strategic approach. So it's doing the big science stuff that individually companies perhaps wouldn't either have the capacity to invest in or necessarily fits their agenda. So like you say, the sort of serial improvement, working with plant science geneticists to make sure we've got a sustainable supply of high quality distilling barley, or even this big anti-counterfeiting work, which requires, I mean, ultimately, it's a collaborative approach. The distillers participate, but your institute leads the research and manages the research.
And you mentioned you said the word before of counterfeiting and spotting fakes, and that's obviously something that is quite a more modern problem. Obviously, with the explosion of single malt Scotch whisky, and that trend away from blended whiskey, with especially in the last sort of, I'd say safely say the last 3 decades, we've seen that paradigm shift in consumer behavior and how people approach different spirits. So is that something that's obviously had to ramp up a fair bit with spotting fakes and fake B'More's, fake Macallan? Like, obviously there's certain brands hit worse than others, but
I think so, Matt. I mean, obviously, when people copy you, then it's, the greatest form of flattery. And, in many ways, it demonstrates the phenomenal success of Scotch whisky, and that now counterfeiting is a huge problem. I think with the growth of the secondary market, and I don't know what it's like where you are, but certainly here in the UK, the secondary market, the auction market is absolutely huge right now. People selling bottles almost literally the day they bought them. And of course, that gives the perfect platform for counterfeiting and selling fake. So yeah, it's been a growing problem, but it's always cat and mouse. But the industry has developed a lot of clever technology and is constantly exploring clever technology to help us identify fakes. Now, at the brand level, with the responsibility of the distiller. So as you can probably imagine, companies like Diageo with very high value brands like Johnny Walker, for example, or their malts, will have the technology, the wherewithal, the knowledge in place to help them spot fakes of their brands. What the Scotch Whisky Research Institute does is deal with that kind of fake generic Scotch whisky thing. And it's all really about protecting the brand Scotch whisky, because obviously those two words carry a lot of cachet and a lot of weight. And protecting those both in terms of quality of product and authenticity of product is one of the things that the Institute is charged with. And particularly if this is around liquid, distillers can come up with clever ways to label their bottle to identify counterfeit. Of course, what you can never do is add anything to Scotch whisky as a marker to help us identify fake Scotch whisky, and therefore we need clever technology and the science behind it to understand that.
So what relationship then does something like the SWRI have with something like the Scotch Whisky Association in protecting appellation and things like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I guess that you can see them as sister parallel organizations.
Right.
They're not, they are independent of one another, but they work together to do that. And I guess that's one particular area where the SWRI, we'll call them, agenda is led by the SWA to some extent, in that the SWA is charged with protecting Scotch whisky markets globally, and protecting those markets. And a lot of the work that SWRI does on the anti-counterfeiting is on behalf of the SWA. So, for example, you go out, you're in a bar, Matt, or one of our members out there is in a bar, they think that doesn't look right. That bottle can get picked up, sent back to the SWA. It'll eventually end up in the labs at SWRI. And then there's all sorts of clever apply to that to decide whether or not it's Scotch.
Okay, that's very cool. And it's quite. I find that kind of side of the whiskey industry quite fascinating in some ways, because you've got this. You've got places like SWA and SWRI that are providing those, like working together and providing those appellations and protections as to what Scotch whisky should be. In a country like Australia, which has a burgeoning, small but burgeoning whiskey market of our own, of distilleries popping up left, right, and center, it doesn't quite exist here. We've got the requirements here for whiskey, and someone's bound to correct me on this because it probably changes, but are 2 years in wood, and it doesn't actually specify oak. It just says 2 years in wood, which is why some distillers are able to do things like in ash and in red gum and things like that. But 2 years in wood, and that's it. Really, it's like it.
Yeah, I suppose what I'm going to pick from that, Matt, is a number of things. One is, I think my understanding is SWRI is unique. There is no other organisation like it for other Scotch whisky, other whisky categories. And I think there's a similar situation in the US right now, where there's this growing production of whiskey, and there's not yet necessarily the control around that, particularly in the malt category. So, trying to get themselves sorted out. What was the other point I was going to make?
Kettle of Fish, of course, is the growing single malt category in the US, of course.
Well, exactly. I guess that's what I'm getting at, Matt.
Yeah.
I think the other point to make is that it's only with those regulations that you can really have a credible, reliable brand or category that the consumer can have utter confidence and belief in. And sometimes you talk to whiskey enthusiasts like ourselves, and there'll be a lot of maybe criticism leveled at organizations like SWA because they say they stifle innovation and things. You know what? Firstly, nonsense. It doesn't stifle innovation. There's plenty of innovation available. But secondly, come back to those two words, Scotch whisky. They're worth billions of pounds, pounds to the UK economy and economies all over the world. They're worth a huge amount of money, and it's important that those are protected in terms of what Scotch whisky is and the quality that those two words stand for.
Yeah. Okay. There's some questions. I want to lead into sort of the next step of this chat about sort of the involvement of where you are now with SMWS and what your role entails and how that's changing the society. Before I do, I'm going to grab some audience questions coming through.
Yeah.
Jack Finnegan says, if climate has such an impact on the spirit while aging, are there many distilleries using climate control in their barrel houses, and what impact would it have?
Yeah, that's a good question, James. And actually, what I'll do is I'll refer everyone. I think the last issue of Unfiltered, which I think you'll get the digital version there, Matt. There's a piece I wrote on, broadly speaking, the effect of climate on maturation. So the answer is yes, climate does have an impact on maturation. We understand that quite well now because of the extensive studies that certainly SWRI's done, but I think this is also true in Kentucky and other parts of the world. The answer to the second part of the question is, broadly speaking, no. In the Scotch whisky industry, we don't use climate control in terms of warehouse heating. It would be here probably want to accelerate the rate of maturation here. Probably. I know of at least one distillery where they put in a heated warehouse,
Right.
but to my knowledge, it's never been used, and that's the Lindor's Abbey distillery.
Right, which we did a big feature on in an outturn about 2 or 3 months ago. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I think that was very much, I mean, some people may have heard of the late, great Jim Swan, who was getting back to legendary whiskey scientists. You know, Jim had a lot of insight from the work he did, I think, with Cavalan. You know, kind of, I think it was his idea to put these heated warehouses in. But like I say, it's not been used. And you know, there's this interesting debate about if you do artificially heat a warehouse, Scotch, you know, or is our, you know, is our climate what makes Scotch what it is? You know, if you ramp up the warehouse temperatures to something more like the temperatures in Kentucky or, you know, or somewhere else, is that Scotch? Because we know, to go back to the first point, the maturation environment has a significant impact on spirit character, which we could explore in detail. But Matt, I guess it's probably out with scope today. Just to say, you know, most of the work, interestingly, that's been done by the Scotch whisky industry has really been about actually trying to minimise warehouse losses, so the angel share. So conversely, that's probably more about keeping your warehouses cooler in hot summer periods than it is. I'll give you one interesting bit of insight from this article. If you do all of the experiments, then what it tells you and all the modelling, what it tells you, and I say this with tongue in cheek, Scotch whisky isn't a particularly great place to, Scotland isn't a very good place to mature whisky from an economical point of view, because it's, you never really achieve the temperatures required to get really good extraction of flavour from the cask. Now, of course, it isn't all about that, remember. It's not all about...
That's just one aspect of the production. Yeah.
So anyway, I'll stop there.
No, it's great. It's great. Yeah. There's also another question from Rob Akers here who asks, and good evening, Dr. Akers. Dr. Akers to Dr. Andy says, is there anything being done with isotope ratio analysis for provenance? That's a very, very, very specific question.
Yeah. I'm only pausing to just think what I can say on this one. You'll appreciate why, because obviously, you know, if you tell your counterfeiters how you can identify counterfeits, then that kind of spoils things. I guess the one that's kind of you know, most interesting is particularly with regard to some of these extraordinarily old whiskies that you see in the secondary market, and we'll have all heard stories about, you know, these incredibly old Macallans, or there's like the Lefroy from 1902, I think they were, that were kicking about allegedly. And it is possible to do radiocarbon dating type isotope analysis to establish, broadly speaking, when that spirit will have been distilled.
Just dropping out a bit there, Andy. Sorry.
I'll just hold this a wee bit closer. So yeah, using you know, sort of using the radiocarbon isotope ratios from pre and post nuclear bombs and testing, we can get some sense of when spirit may have been distilled. So yes, and I think, you know, there is an interest in exploring other technology like that to help with authenticity.
Okay, very cool.
So Robert, I'd just be interested to know what kind of doctor Robert is then.
He'll have to comment.
Yeah, please do, Robert.
And Darren says, better late than ever, I'm told. That's right, Darren. Even if you're late to the stream, can join in. Just to those who have joined in the last few minutes, I'm talking tonight or this morning in his case, with Dr. Andy Forrester, who is on the Scotch Malt Whisky Society team as our spirits educator. He is I like to think of him as a whiskey scientist and educator, and someone who knows a lot about whiskey and well worth having a chat with tonight. And I want to lead into the next question about the society. And you joined the society, dare I say, about a year ago. I don't want to get that wrong.
Yeah, 18 months. Yeah,
18 months. Sorry, yeah, 18 months. Time flies. And you were brought on, and I was very excited when I heard the news that you joined the SMWS in a role of spirits education and broadening our knowledge base for not just the staff, but of course what then we can bring to our members. And can you explain what it means to be a spirits educator on a broad scale at the society for you?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. And, well, thank you for sharing out. That was really good news to you, because I know you have this same passion for knowledge.
Yeah.
I do. Can I just, before I just answer the question, can I just kind of segue from the Sweary thing, because we talked a lot about the Scotch Whisky Research Institute, and I just wanted to remind everybody that the Scotch Malt Whisky Society is a member now of the institute, and there's a number of reasons for that. One is it enables us to tap into all of the knowledge and expertise that's available there, particularly from a flavor understanding point of view. And I guess we might cover some of this, Matt. So there's obviously, kind of a tactical day-to-day advantage of being a member. But the other thing is, we see ourselves very much part of the Scotch whisky industry. And we believe it's right that we should be part of that collective endeavor that the Scotch whisky industry is invested in to improve on behalf of for us all. Yeah, does that make sense? So, we're not on the periphery of the industry. We're not just taking casks and bottling them. We have nothing to do. We're at the absolute heart and a serious player within the industry. And our membership of of the institute, I think, is a good example of playing our part and being part of the industry itself, and not just feeding off the industry.
That's a really crucial point about not the society is not just there. It's not just feeds off the industry. It's an integral part of it these days.
Yeah,
and integral part of that sort of collective of that. The fact that the society is a member of of Sweary is, I think, quite important.
Yeah, I mean, we're the only, and I hesitate to use the term, Matt, but for simplicity, we're the only independent bottler, i.e., a company that doesn't have a distillery produce its own spirit and bottles other people's spirit at the moment, who are members. We're the smallest member, but like I say, this isn't a criticism, but there's lots of other people bottling whiskey who literally are just on the periphery of the industry, very much at the heart of the industry and part of it. So that's the point I just wanted to make. So to answer your question, so yeah, I mean, interestingly, it was kind of a meeting between myself and Kai, who I think people have heard from before, our spirits director, at the Worldwide Distilled Spirits Conference a few years back, that led to SMWS joining Sweary. And I guess maybe even at that time, I had my eye on coming back to the society, because what I didn't mention earlier is I worked at the society many, many years ago, where I was behind the bar. I did a summer behind the bar before. I worked behind the bar. So the society's always been part of my whiskey journey and life. And I think probably, interestingly, kind of to lead into this, I learned a huge amount about whiskey being behind the bar at the society. And of course, now my role is to provide that knowledge to our experts now, so our ambassadors and the guys who work in the venues here in the UK. So yeah, joined about, what was it? Like I say, I think it was sort of May last year. And my role is primarily education. But as you know, Matt, we're a small organization. Everybody really ends up getting involved in a bit of everything. But I guess there's a number of kind of major elements to what I do. First and foremost, providing education to our ambassadors and people around the world. And as you know, Matt, let's say when I came in, the first thing I did was sat down and started to develop a formal education program. And
formal
I was just
program. Yep.
Sorry,
you said a formal education program.
Formal education program. Yeah. Is my audio okay?
It's just dropping. It's just going really low for a moment or two. It's sort of dropping out. It might be a headphone issue, or it might be might just be your microphone. I'm not sure. Sorry,
I can go get a proper mic if it gets bad.
It might help. It might help, especially if we're digging into the meaty stuff here. Yeah.
Is it worth me doing that?
I don't know.
It didn't help last time. That was all.
Okay, we'll keep going.
I'll hold this here and put your hand up if it's getting bad, Matt. Yeah.
Okay.
So where was I? So develop this education program, put all this lovely stuff together. And then, of course, I was just about to roll it out. I'd done a few sessions in the venues, and of course, what happened? We shut down the world. And but that, there was a little bit of a silver lining to this, because what it meant is I very quickly started delivering this education to all of you guys all around the world, like this. Through streaming, through Team and Zoom and all that sort of stuff. And so that's really what I've done for the last sort of 6 to 8 months, is been delivering this program of seminars, looking at principally, where does flavor come from in the whiskey production process? Okay, because as you know, flavor is the single most important thing as far as we're concerned. We very much position ourselves our people like you, Matt, and others around the world. You're there as mentors to people going on the whiskey journey that we've been on. They come to us to find out what they want to know about whiskey. So it's about providing that knowledge, and particularly with reference to flavor, for you to be a mentor to our members who are starting out on that whiskey journey.
Yep.
Not only did I deliver a lot of training as well, but also by using our connections in the industry, because as I said, we're very much in the industry. We have lots of good friends at distilleries, lots of well-known people, and I got lots of them to deliver guest speaker sessions. We had people like Richard Patterson, master blender of White and Mackay. I'm sure everybody knows of Richard. We had people like Jim McEwen of Bruichladdich, Jack Mayo and David Robertson of Holyrood Distillery, people from Swiry, all came on to give us their perspective on different elements of Scotch whisky, particularly the technical side of things and the flavour side of things. So really, that's primarily what I do and have been doing. Sorry, I'm going to stop talking and let you chip in, Matt.
No, you're all good. This is good.
So the other part, I guess the other major parts of my role are working with Kai, our spirits director, and Ewan, our spirits manager, in terms of managing the whiskey and the tasting panel. And I guess those are a couple of things we probably want to talk about in a bit more detail.
Well, that was where I wanted to go next, talking about tasting panel, and something I've talked about on stream a number of times to our members is about the expert tasting panel, so that every cask they pick from an outturn has already been through a process of elimination, if you like. Everything's been filtered out. The best casks are only the ones that are bottled. Can you give a bit more sort of insight from, I guess, the other side of the pond, of what that looks like and how that changes, and what's changing there, and what the development is with your role?
Yeah. Okay. So, like I said, so one of the main things I'm there to do is help with the tasting panel, and I guess what we could start talking more about, Matt, is sort of the quality assurance, the quality system that's in place to ensure that we only bottle the best. And like you say, everything that sits in those green bottles has that seal of approval of a rigorous tasting panel process. And of course, let me first touch upon the incredibly creative element, which frankly, Matt, I'm rubbish at. But first, the panel write those wonderful tasting notes. They're a unique and make an SMWS bottle what it is. So, people with incredibly colourful language and vocabulary that write these tasting notes. And that's one element of it.
That's Dr. There you go. He's material science / phys chem.
Okay, right. Yeah, hence maybe the question to some extent.
He's one of our Smart Cookie members. There you go.
Let's chat at some point, Rob. Let's chat. Hello,
Patrick from Gothenburg. Good to see you tuning in. Thanks so much, Patrick. And Chris Reed says there is a US distillery doing climate control that can replicate different climates from around the world. Yes, of course, Chris. There's a lot going on in the US distilleries, changing up and mixing around and playing around with things like that, which is always good to see. And
no, that's a good point. And I did mean to touch on the fact that I think in the US they exploit a lot more about what we know about different temperatures in different parts of the warehouse. Because we know from studies in Scotland that temperature is stratified in warehouses at particular times of the year, and you can kind of exploit that to accelerate maturation or
Yep.
Kind of ended up back to where we were, Matt. So what was it? So tasting panel. So yeah, there's the kind of tasting notes element to it, but also, and I guess okay. So what does that require? Well, I want to pause and try and get a nice sequence to this. So okay. So what are the panel there for? Firstly, to write those tasting notes, and also to ensure that the quality of the spirit that goes into the bottle is worthy. Sound, yeah.
A little drop out there. It's all right. All good.
I don't understand this. It's usually fine.
Yeah, it's just doing like this. It's just sort of up and down.
Okay.
Yeah. All good. All good. I think we're doing okay.
Hopefully everyone can hear. But stick it in the comments if you miss anything, and try and cover it again. So, right. Let me tell you about the panel. So it's made up of a mix of people who work for the society, like me, like Kai, but also members and other independent experts. And interestingly, Matt, going back, even when I was working in my John Mark and Robbo days for Edrington, I was a member of the panel. So people from other companies. And I guess the panel is independent in that there's no commercial pressure to select any particular cask for bottling. You know, the panel is completely free to say that ain't good enough and it isn't going to get bottled.
Yep.
It doesn't pass the panel, it doesn't get bottled. So what about the skill set of those the panel? Firstly, they're all whiskey enthusiasts who've been around whiskey for a long time and have a huge amount of experience. And that is the single most important thing, is experience. Having nosed and tasted lots and lots and lots of whiskey. Develop your palate and develop the ability to describe whiskey. And that ability to describe whiskey is really important. One of the first things I do if I get a new panelist join the panel is I'll check their ability to both correctly identify and describe aroma. And I do that using a set of little jars that have got artificial aromas in, whiskey-like aromas, and they need to score as high as a master blender would to become a panelist at the Scotch Malt Society. Yeah. So you need to get at least sort of 80% of these accurately described to be on the panel, and that's what would be expected for a master blender in Diageo or any company like that.
Right.
Flavor recognition and the ability to describe flavor. The other thing I do when I get a new panelist is try and assess their ability to identify what we might call faults or off notes. So that might be immaturity. So what are the kind of signature telltale signs that the whiskey hasn't fully matured? Or where are there faults, like maybe a taint in the whiskey? So it might be, that kind of corked aroma that you can get in wine.
Yep.
Whiskey. So the ability to detect things like that, or excessive sulfur, which can make quite unpleasant. Sulfur compounds are naturally present in the spirit. They can, at certain levels, they can be very desirable. They give weight and meatiness and character to the whiskey at very high levels.
Spirit sulfur versus cask sulfur kind of argument right there as well.
To some extent, yeah, exactly. Probably cask sulfur unpleasant, spirit sulfur possibly good, but it's all about thresholds and levels.
Yep.
So I try and get, I ensure that panelists, or ultimately they're all trained to recognize these different characters.
Yep.
Now, what I know is everybody has different strengths and weaknesses. Okay. So you, Matt, might have a really good nose for sulfur compounds, and mine might not be particularly sensitive to them. That's okay, as long as I, as a panel, you and I as panel leaders understand that, then you can mitigate that. And it's good to have representation of different threshold perception.
Yeah.
Do you want to chip in?
No, it's sort of like, it's as long as you're consistent with your palate in a way, then it's about consistency, isn't it? In a scoring system and in a palate system.
Yeah. Okay, so hopefully that gives a sense of the panel. So, selected from very experienced whiskey people, and we have the training in place, continuous training to ensure that we all have the ability to do the job properly, and we have the understanding of the panel to ensure that we can account for people's different strengths and weaknesses. Here's an interesting one that we as an industry didn't know until recently. Oak lactones, Matt, which are the compounds that we get lots of from American oak. They get kind of that coconutty gorse flower sweetness to the whiskey. The threshold levels for those vary hugely in the population, naturally, it's genetic. And you might be there describing these massive full-on oak lactones and all this coconut vanilla, and someone's sitting there going, I don't get that.
Yeah, right.
And that's just simply, so what might be your, wow, this must be a first fill cask, is someone else's, wow, this must be a refill cask.
Right. So like that sort of those coconut vanilla popcorn kind of notes that you get off a lot. Yeah, and that's like,
and that's a fairly new one to us. We knew sulfur perception varied, and TCA, which is the corked aroma. Anyway, I digress a little bit. So what do we do when we're presented with a whiskey? And tell me if this is already something that people will be familiar with because you've heard it before. But essentially, any panel session will have sort of 7 or 8 different whiskies. What we do as a group is we nose and taste them at both full natural strength from the cask and also diluted with water. And we record our tasting notes for both of those, and we assign a score for each of those things. So nose undiluted, palate undiluted, nose diluted, palate undiluted. And we assign a score between 0 and 10. Anything less than a 5 is a fail and won't end up in a green bottle. Anything above a 5 will be considered for bottling. Now, a close 5 may not get bottled. It's not automatic, but certainly anything that gets a 6 or more is society standard and will get bottled.
Yeah. The way that you and Campbell sort of described it to me once was that not to think of it like 5 out of 10, to think of it sort of like a barometer. That 5 is sort of like in the minimum acceptable of where the needle should sit. And
Correct.
Sort of everything above that is even better. And I recently did a panel session with him where the score of the sample presented, we did a Zoom panel session, tasting panel with him.
Yeah.
And the sample that we both had in our glass scored an even 8.0. So that just meant it sat on the 8 mark, and it was great where it was there. And I can't give anything more away than what we're tasting, but I can tell you that it sat very nicely there. I'm going to grab some of the comments coming through and some of the questions coming through. We'll do a quick fire around here. So here we go. Where do we go? Quick fire round. Lachlan asks, terroir in whiskey, is it a thing?
I think the jury's out. My feeling is probably not. But as a good scientist, you'd never completely dismiss it. I think it's a deep subject. I mean, what do you mean by terroir?
We could spend a whole live stream on that, I realize, and I don't want to take up your whole morning. So
yeah, but I think my feeling is okay. So in terms of where is the barley grown? No, but could you argue that terroir is where does the peat come from? For example, in peated whiskey, yeah, the peat from Orkney versus the Highlands of Scotland versus Islay are all significantly different in composition, and we know from experimental studies that they give different character to the whiskey. And I can even send you some links to some interesting research papers on that, Matt. So, I guess what do we mean by terroir determines whether that's a yes or no. But the idea of certainly in the kind of French wine thing, as in where do the grapes grow, where does the barley grow? My feeling is probably not.
Yep.
So, and certainly as in where the distillery is, no. I mean, there's great examples. Boveni and Glenfiddich, they're next door to each other. They make totally different spirit. Something Bill Lumsden said to me once, and this was, funnily enough, in Bill Lumsden, of course, whiskey maker, Glenmorangie,
yes,
pioneer of additional cask maturation. I remember this was in the vaults, in the cask room here in Edinburgh. Bill was asked the question, and he said, look, just remember, whiskey in many ways don't destroy the romance, but whiskey can compared to wine, is an industrial product. It's very highly processed. Wine is very much an agricultural product. You know, pick the grapes, crush them, ferment, and it's much easier, therefore, to see that the terroir could have an impact on wine than something that is so different to the materials that it was made from. So I'll leave that with. So that's from Bill Lumsden. Told me that a long time ago.
Yeah, no, I think I've heard something. I think I've heard him say something very similar. Another quick fire question: what percentage of casks passed to the tasting panel currently?
Good question. 80-90%, maybe. It's difficult to say, because one of the things we added more in years gone by, absolutely any cask went straight to the panel. We do a little bit of pre-screening now before we put them to the panel, so we do ensure that we're not wasting time, because we have thousands of samples to do. As you can, we're bottling, 1,000 casks a year. That's a lot of samples. We can't spend 20 minutes on a sample with precious panel time for something that's clearly going to fail. So if it has got a very obvious fault, it might not even get to the panel in the first place. The panel there. What I see, I think, typically I might be reject 1, maybe 2 in a typical session of 8.
And lastly, actually, also from Lachlan, who asked the question about terroir. We meant to mention this at the beginning of the stream, but he asks, are those vinyls behind you? If so, scientifically, what music pairs with what whiskey? Andy's actually, you're quite a metal fan, quite a rock and metal fan.
I am.
As a result, I put up I put Bat Piss from Melbourne. A big shout out to Julian, to Billy Viard for that one. Liturgy, I found a New York hipster metal band that I was going to put in here as well, and I put a Sun record because who doesn't like a bit of drone? So tell me what's going on behind you.
Eclectic mix of all sorts. And Matt, I don't know any of those bands, so that's some more discovery for me. I guess my true love is new wave of British heavy metal, and then everything that happened till about 92. So thrash and death metal. So I actually did try and prop up Scream Bloody Gore by band Death. I've got a couple of Iron Maiden covers up on the wall.
Right. Yeah, a bit of Iron Maiden here on the wall. Fantastic.
So rock and metal. I'm currently going through a death metal phase at the moment, and it has to be vinyl, of course.
Yeah, it has to be. Yep, that's it.
Latest arrival was Altars of Madness by Morbid Angel.
Very cool, very cool.
Yeah. So, yes, it is vinyl. And scientifically, what music pairs with whiskey? I'm not sure, but certainly I seem to remember reading about some experiment where an American distiller was playing Metallica albums to casks of whiskey. This idea that sort of this sonic resonance thing might actually increase or improve the maturation. But
it might, or it might be a massive gimmick, and it might be not really. Who knows? We'll find out.
Yeah, as long as they're not playing anything, after Justice for All, then.
Master of Puppets.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, Master of Puppets is fine. In fact, that's on the turntable right now.
There you go.
25 RPM album. Sounds good. Is this about whiskey, or is this about music now, Matt? Because we can do music.
We've hit the 45-minute mark, which is where we want to get to have just a nice discussion with you about what that looks like, what your role looks like, how whiskey education looks, and how that's changing the society through the means of science and through your work. So thank you so much, Andy, for your time this morning. I really appreciate it. Why don't we call this part 1? And if we can do a catch up for members, dig a bit deeper on a few of these topics that we sort of only really got to touch on today. Because if we keep going, we could go for hours on some of these topics, especially digging a bit deeper on some of them. But we'll collect some questions in on this thread. We'll bring them into the next chat as well, and we'll have a chat maybe in a couple of weeks. So it'll be great.
Yeah, anytime. Because I think the one thing, it's all very academic, everybody hearing about how does the panel operate. But what I was going to share with people is how the process we go through can help them better
Mm.
kind of explore and understand the whiskey in the glass and kind of how to nose and taste whiskey in that way. And I think that would be useful to share with people. So maybe we can do that. And
yeah, that'd be great. Amazing. Yeah.
Anytime.
Thank you so much. It's so great to have you as part of the team, and I'm really glad that we can bring what you're doing to Australian members as well from time to time. So thank you, everyone, for all the amazing comments and questions for Dr. Andy. We'll be coming back live with him soon. In the meantime, Wednesday night, tomorrow night is, of course, Whiskey Roundtable with special guest Reg Paps from Manly Distilling. And Thursday night, we have a very special guest lined up as well, which is to do with our festive outturn. And then this Friday is the festive outturn release date for you to be able to view it in ahead of the 13th of November. Andy, thank you so much again for joining us this evening in our time, this morning your time. And as you said, there are actually 2 8 o'clocks in the day, and we found the first one.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Matt, and thanks everyone for joining. You'll have probably seen my email address. You can get in touch with has been at the bottom somewhere. So ask the doc at smws.com. Send me your questions, and I'll answer them. And some of them we'll try and publish in Unfiltered, where we think they're interesting for everybody.
I'm just going to pop that on screen here for everyone to see. Yeah. There it is, just beneath me there. Ask the doc at smws.com. That's Andy's email address. Pop Andy, I appointed that way. That's Andy's email address. Dr. Andy, our head of spirits education at the society, and it's you can ask some questions. Like he said, it might even get published in Unfiltered, and it'd be great for everyone to learn more about what you do and the science behind whiskey and all the flavors and the flavor approach that we take at the society. Thank you so much. Don't go anywhere, Andy. I'll catch you all again tomorrow night. And cheers and thanks again.
See you all. Cheers. In good spirit.
Cheers.